Life isn't always fair. Pandemics, inflation, politics. It feels like the madness will never end. But then, I'm reminded of another world, where all of that secular noise just fades. Into oblivion it fades, and so do I, as I enter God's country. Where man and beast merge at the confluence of nature's fury.
My goodness.
And in this country, I become something fresh, something new, something tangible, in an untangible, secular world.
Hey guys, so in this video we're going to cover some tips of things that I learned in my times when I hiked out in the ZigZag Ridge area, just between Prince George, BC and McBride, BC, a beautiful area, gorgeous backcountry, one of the best areas close to the area of Prince George and McBride that you can find. There's lots of good areas, but this one's particularly nice. Let's get into the tips. Hope you guys learned some things from this. Let's get right into it. Alright guys, let's jump right into it. So the first item is use a checklist to ensure critical gear is not forgotten. This one's really important. I put it as the first tip for something I learned on ZigZag Ridge. You can see here on the screen I have a link to another YouTuber, Mauser Taz is his sort of handle here on YouTube. Lots of great hiking videos. He's in, I believe, Tasmania. And over here he's got a website, blog.mauser.com.au, and under gear, under Mauser's gear, comes up with this page, and he's got these gear selection lists. This just kind of shows an example of something you could do. So he uses this website called lighterpack.com, and you can build your lists using that site. And basically here he shows a list of essential gear that he packs, kind of a checklist. He also has the added advantage of it showing the weight, so you know the exact weight of each of those things, so you can kind of look at all of this, make sure you don't forget anything, but you also have the advantage of seeing, well, what is the weight? So you can, you know, just make sure that that's something you really need for this trip, and then you have your base weight and your full weight, everything there, and you can scroll down and whatnot. Again, this website gives a lot of detail as you plug in the items that you use, and you can kind of pick and choose what you're going to take on that particular hike. But using something like this, a checklist, is really important. Just to kind of continue on that idea, our multi-day trip this past winter in 2024, at the end of the year there, it might have been early 2025, I don't remember the exact date, but it was this past winter. I forgot to bring winter gloves, guys. Winter gloves. Now, I had an emergency pair buried at the bottom of my pack for emergency scenarios, but my main pair I didn't bring. So instead of, you know, and of course you pack a whole ton of gear, and you don't want to have to pull everything out and repack it, right? So luckily Gerald had just an old pair of sort of mechanic working gloves in the back of his car, so that's what I wore all the way up to where we set up camp. And so if I had followed a checklist, you know, before leaving, I would have made sure I didn't forget something like that. Other times I've forgotten to bring my inReach beacon, your emergency beacon. I mean, guys, luckily, you know, Gerald had his, so because there's two of us and each of us have a beacon, so, you know, something like an emergency beacon, never share that beacon. If each of you should have one, because if one of you gets hurt, the other one needs to contact help. You know, you fall off a cliff or something, you can't use that guy's emergency beacon. So make sure you use a checklist. Things like bringing a saw, right, for fire starter in the wintertime. It can make or break your trip, right? You may need to make a fire, especially when other gear fails, or you're in like an emergency and you need to get warm. You could fall into water when you're snowshoeing. You don't know you're walking over a creek, or you do, but it just happens to break through and you fall in, and now it's really cold. Now you're wet and you're getting soaked from wet snow. And that's basically what happened. I was soaked from wet snow when we went up ZigZag Ridge, but I did have the saw. So, we could make a fire, dry off, that kind of thing. Avalanche gear in the wintertime, right? That's something that's easy to forget. Very critical. These are like life-saving things. And again, they'll make or break the trip potentially. Critical layering, your base layer, your warm layers, all that kind of thing. Extra pair of socks when you get wet in the winter, especially wintertime. This becomes really important. I'm not saying it's not important in the summer and warmer months, but winter is really life and death situation. You want to make sure that you test your gear as well. On that checklist, you might want to add extra items saying, test the sleep system. Make sure that pad doesn't have any leaks. When you bring it out in -20 or Celsius or something like that, you really want that gear to work. Your electronics, your light sources, headlamps, cook system, right? These are things you need your cook system to create water in the wintertime, for example. So, and to cook your food, of course. So these are all really important things. Make sure that you don't forget them. When they're on the checklist, you can make sure it's there and make sure that they work. So that's the end of number 1. Let's move on to the next item. All right, tip number 2 is do not swap important gear at the last minute, especially when it hasn't been tested recently. You need to stick with gear that you can trust. That's kind of the bottom line of this one. When I did the multi-day trip up ZigZag Ridge, we needed a bigger pack. I had my Durston Kakwa 55 and kind of wasn't happy with, I was kind of reaching the limit of what that pack could take for winter gear, and I wanted to pack a bit more items than really it could fit. So I ended up taking a 70-liter pack that I had. It was kind of like a no-name brand, a junky pack. It was extremely heavy. The materials were pretty cheap. It was 70 liters, though, so it offered a bit more room. It was terrible. It was uncomfortable. When I put the water bottles in these kind of side floppy water bottle side pockets, they were falling out. It was just terrible. Terrible all around. In that wet, snowy conditions, it was hard to unclip the buckles, and it was just a horrible pack, one of those generic ones. And I used it once, I think like 10 or 12 years ago, when I did a trip up Fang Mountain with some of my boys and some friends, and just a terrible, terrible pack. So if it's an emergency, if you need to swap something, for an absolute emergency at the end, just borrow good tested gear from a friend. Find someone who has gear that can say, yeah, this gear works, a backpack, a tent, whatever. Don't trust recently untested gear. That's gear that you haven't tested, within the last, I'm going to say 3 months. It could fail and lead to an aborted trip or even injury or death, right? So like in the wintertime, when you're sleeping on that really cold ground, cold temperatures, -20, -15, those are some of the conditions that Gerald and I go out in. You really need that heat. If your pad fails you, we do bring like a foam pad for an emergency, so it's not end of the world, but it could abort the trip. It could really mess things up. That pack just made a miserable, miserable hike. I just hated it the whole way. I did enjoy the trip overall, but the one thing I really remember is I shouldn't have swapped that backpack. I just wasn't on my game on that trip. And so don't swap important gear. Your stove, your backpack, your sleep system, your tent. If it hasn't been tested, if you can't trust it, just go to a friend that has something that's in good shape and just borrow it for that one trip and then figure it out later. But just don't do it. Let's move on to the next item. All right, so tip number 3 is pre-plan for being wet. Just in case you may not get wet, but you need to be prepared and pre-plan for it. Whether it's summer, whether it's winter, temperatures fluctuate. On this ZigZag trip, it was +5 and it went down to -8. So freezing water, when it's like water during the day and kind of freezing when it crosses over night, it's kind of almost worst case scenario, because the wind picks up, it starts getting cold, everything's soaking wet, everything's just wet, that wet snow, which translates to wet boots and wet clothes and everything, and then it just freezes solid overnight. So this is like, I think, the first time where my shoes, when I took them off, they froze solid in whatever condition I left them in. And if you don't know what to do in that scenario, I do have other videos talking about how to prepare for winter camping, etc., what to do with your shoes. But you need to pull the tongues out and make the shoelaces straight, stuff like that. But also your socks, you need to lay them out a certain way, or put them on your chest and bring them in your sleeping bag when they're wet. Your coat, like I had a fleece jacket that I was wearing when it started getting cold and I was all wet. Well, all that wetness from the snow falling down, and it was rain earlier, soaking into that outer shell, and eventually it just froze solid. So however I put it down on the tent floor, it just froze flat. So very hard to kind of get my hands into the arms and to get that thing wrapped around me without almost like breaking it, because it was frozen solid with all that moisture in there. So just, you have to know what to do when everything gets wet. You can't just quickly jump in your sleeping bag and just leave everything and go to sleep. You need to have a plan for your footwear, your jackets, your pants, your socks, your gloves, all of that stuff, because it's going to be potentially hypothermic, or in the summertime you're going to be very uncomfortable, and you just need to know how to deal with all of those things. So pre-plan, have a plan that if things get wet, you know what to do. Things, and along with that pre-plan, things might also get burned in a fire. Like if you're planning on having a fire, you get sparks on your jacket or on your rain gear or something like that. Now you have these holes that could be a problem, especially with your boots, because then water can get in there. And now if you don't have like some kind of waterproof socks or bread bags or some kind of plastic bags, which I have a video all about keeping your feet dry and warm, check that one out. But that's pretty important in the winter. But so your feet and your hands are extremely important. Gloves will freeze if they're wet on the inside and out. I'm trying out a new pair of gloves this winter. Ice climbers use them. I'll show it on the screen there. They're designed for Japanese fishermen. They don't become brittle in the extreme cold. There's some kind of urethane on the outside and some kind of insulation layer on the inside. A lot of people swear by them in the backcountry. I'm going to try that out this winter. Those are going to be my go-to winter gloves, especially if they work out. I will have another emergency winter pair of gloves in my pack, but you definitely want to prepare for wet conditions. And winter is no game, no playing around. When things get wet and frozen, it's game over. Either the trip is aborted, or you're getting injured, or maybe hypothermic and death. So depending on how far in the backcountry you are and how quickly people can get to you, if you can't make a fire because other gear's failing, it can be a cascading set of disaster. So pre-plan for wetness and temperature fluctuations, know how that affects you and your gear, and be ready for it. Let's move on to the next point. All right, so moving on to item number 4, winter versus summer site selection have very different requirements. So what do I mean by that? Well, some of you will probably already know some of these things are obvious, but some are maybe not so obvious. So in wintertime, setting up too close to the trees, what we learned at ZigZag Ridge, when the winds pick up, especially if it's overnight, you're in your tent, and large pieces of snow or ice can come crashing down from the branches of the trees as those trees collect the snow and it turns into ice. It can damage your tent, can injure you. It can be pretty precarious. So you really do need to be careful when the winds pick up and that all that snow starts blowing down. It's not a good situation. So you do want to, of course, pick an area where trees are around so the winds are not blowing right against your tent, but you don't want to be too close to those trees as well. Another thing is level ground can be created in the wintertime, where you can't do that in the summer, by digging, right? When you have your avalanche gear, a shovel, you can kind of dig it out and Digging down closer to the ground, the temperatures get warmer. At ground level, it's usually about 0 degrees, even if it's minus 20 out. When you dig down, that ground will get warmer and warmer as you go down, so that's just something to note. When you get to a campsite, you also need to pack the site in the wintertime with your snowshoes or your skis. It's almost always needed because that snow is fluffy and soft, and you need to set up your tent and be able to walk around on something that's pretty solid. So just remember, digging down will improve warmth, and you'll need to pack your site, so you need some time there. So make sure you bring your headlamp in the wintertime and it's working in those cold conditions and whatnot, because usually you're almost always working in the dark in the winter, unless you want to be in your tent for like 16 hours, which isn't too fun. You'll need a headlamp. Also, if you learn the skill of building a quinzhee, that's just another name for like a snow cave. If you can build that in the wintertime, that can save your life, but it's also very convenient. You don't even need a tent if you can build a quinzhee. It's quite the skill to do, but it's very warm in a well-built quinzhee, but it can be very dangerous. Even if you're a professional at it, they can collapse. But very good skill. You can build it just about anywhere where there's lots of snow, and you have a shovel and you have time. Also, another thing is avalanche conditions. You need to build your campsite in an area that's not near an avalanche slide zone. So that doesn't, of course, apply in the summertime, but really need to watch where you are setting up to make sure it's not near one of those slide zones. Dangers also in the wintertime are covered by that snow and ice in the wintertime. You could be walking over a pond or large sinkholes or crevasses. You could be right close to a cornice and maybe not even know it at the edge of a cliff. So you need to be really careful where you are. Don't want to set up your campsite on a pond or something like that, as if you're making a fire or the warmth from your body in your tent melts, it could be pretty nasty. So just need to be conscious of where your site is, what's underneath you, and that it's safe. So these are just a number of things to consider. Winter versus summer site selection, very different requirements. Let's move on to the next point. And for tip number 5, remember this, that forecasts don't always match reality. Be prepared to adjust. Warmer winter temperatures, especially close to 0, means terrible wetness. Things are really wet. The snow is wet. You're overheating. You're wet. Everything just gets more wet. Your tent gets more condensation. Also consider stormy, windy weather. That's one thing. Usually we check precipitation and avalanche forecast, but remember, you need to check, is there fog? Is it windy? What's the wind? That's sort of a different type of forecast to look at. I did not check the wind and fogginess on the ZigZag multi-day trip, and the views were really poor. The wind affected I knew it was going to be somewhat moderate temperature, but so that wet snow sticking on the trees, and then the wind came and it blew heavy chunks of snow down on us, and we were wet, and our campsites were getting pounded by kind of chunky snow. Wasn't great. So things won't always go perfect, even when the forecast says it's going to be great. It doesn't always follow that in the mountains. That's okay. A day in the backcountry can still be a good day when you're prepared. Just make sure that critical gear is on hand. That one tip that I mentioned about having a checklist, make sure that for unexpected forecast changes, you have the right gear. I remember a story from Chris Goulet. He was one of the guys who in the past 10 to 15 years climbed up Mount Sir Alexander in Kakwa Provincial Park. He did it solo, and visibility went to 0. He was up on a glacier, and I think it was like several days, maybe even a week. He could not see anything, so he had to hunker down for several days, and he just went to go to the bathroom, and maybe 100 meters away from camp, and he just couldn't find his way back. His footprints were completely covered in snow again. He got turned around, and took him a while, I think like an hour or something, to find where his tent was. So temperatures can plunge, and remember, when they do get colder, minus 20 and colder, your propane stove may not work. It becomes unusable potentially. So if you don't have the right stove, or if the conditions really get extreme, your stove may not work, your drinks will freeze up. Your footwear, socks, boots, everything freezes up. Your wet boots, gloves, jacket, like I mentioned before, you need to be able to deal with that. So you always be able to make a fire, guys. If you can make a fire, maybe your Bic lighter won't work when it's that cold. You have flint and rod, right? Be ready for these conditions when there's an emergency. If you can make a fire, you can make water, you can dry off, you can get warm. Making a fire in the winter is critical. You need to be able to have that emergency gear. When temperatures fluctuate close to freezing, like above and below, like on the ZigZag trip, it's almost more dangerous than if it was like minus 30 in a way. I don't say it is, I say almost, because it causes a lot of instability in your equipment. Things get wet and then they freeze, and it's really hard on your body and on your equipment, and you just don't know what to do, and you think, oh, it's mild, I can drink this water, and then it's frozen because overnight, and it's my socks are wet, it's not that cold out, I'll just put them on in the morning. Well, now it's frozen solid. Just doesn't take much to go below freezing for everything to become unusable and create a problem. So just remember, forecasts don't always match reality. Be prepared for those changing conditions, and you'll have a great time in the backcountry. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed these tips. The ZigZag Ridge area was a fantastic place to backpack, and both summer and winter. Just get yourself prepared. Hope the tips from this series of these backcountry trips have helped you. If they have, please leave comments below if you have more questions, if you have something to add, and hope they help you prepare for your next backcountry journey. Catch you on the next one. Thanks.